Mansfield, if you haven't met me already. Thank you, Barbara. I guess we'll just go ahead and get started. We're going to, whoops, I didn't mean for that to advance. I'm losing control. It says I can control, but it's not happening.
Okay, I moved my screen. Okay.
There. Okay, I'm in control now. Well, technology, bear with us, please, if we have these problems. We've practiced this a few times, and it went pretty well the last time we did it, so let's go. At any rate, we're going to be talking about the development. I didn't do that either. I haven't.
I was moving. Sorry.
Oh, okay. We're going to talk about the development of floristics in southwestern Idaho, and we're going to start out by giving you a little bit of history, and then we're going to, it'll be focusing on some of the people who have been involved in floristics in southwestern Idaho. And then we're going to take a look at sort of the goals of developing a flora for southern Idaho or for any location. And that'll go to Barbara then, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about we'll talk about the forays and my Owyhee flora, and then Barbara will talk about her flora of the Boise Front area. So that's kind of where we're going. And floristics is really the study of the geographic distribution of plant groups. And so we're talking about vascular plants exclusively today, because that's what Barbara and I are basically focused on. And we're going to start by kind of going back to the turn of the 20th century and saying, okay, what was floristics like then? And basically, one of the people who was involved first in getting floristics going happened to be the founder of the college working for the last 30 years, William Judson Boone, president of the College of Idaho, first president. What I'd like to do is just to start by reading this little quote from a book by H.H. Hayman, quoting Harold Tucker, who you'll meet in just a moment. But Harold Tucker said this of William Judson Boone: "The field then, practically untouched or at least unrecorded, was a challenge to Dr. Boone, for when he came, the major botanical surveys of this area had not yet begun. So that in those early days, a few minutes hike to Indian Creek or Canyon Hill brought camas, hyacinths, roosterbills, bluebells, violets, Indian paintbrush, larkspur, buttercups, dozens of others, which we must now search for in the more distant mountain foothills. A glance through the herbarium collected in 1897 to 1901 is very enlightening along those lines." And the herbarium, so this is out of Caldwell, where the College of Idaho is. The herbarium that he's talking about is one that was founded by William Judson Boone at the time that the college was founded. So he started collecting plants. Now, McBride out in New Plymouth was the sort of one of the earliest resident botanists. There have been collectors passing through earlier than that. And I can't remember the time when Louis Henderson, L.H. Henderson, was collecting up in northern Idaho. Pam can fill us in on that later. But we founded the herbarium here at the College of Idaho, and William Judson Boone did that. And so the process of studying floristics is basically collecting the data, what's there. So here you can see an example of one of the earliest collections. This is one of William Judson Boone's, collected at Jump Creek in 1907. And the herbarium includes other things like the puffball held here by Aurora. But the herbarium focuses that we're going to talk about is the vascular plant herbarium. And after Boone was here for 42 years, his legacy has been continued by the fairly short succession of botanists. I'm only the fourth in the almost 130-year history of the college. After William Judson Boone for 40 years, Harold Tucker, for whom the herbarium at the College of Idaho is named, continued those collections. And then many of you know, or certainly are familiar with Pat Packard. and she was the third in the succession of botanists, all of whom had floristics as their center of study. And so Pat would, in the fashion of William Judson Boone, although by car, take students out to various locations. And one of the things that happened early on in her career was the new road down into Leslie Gulch, which you'll hear about in just a minute. But as she took students into the field, we realized that there were a lot of plants that were collected for the first time, particularly in Leslie Gulch. And you can see here Packard's blazing star, Packard's wormwood, Packard's milkvetch, Packard biscuit root. That's a few of the plants named for Pat Packard, not all of them. And you can see the plant Menselia picardi there, Packard's blazing star, you see right here. See Glad, the authority, that was named by Judith Glad, one of Pat's students who went down into Leslie Gulch. And Jim Grimes and Barbara Ertter, well, you know who Barbara Ertter is here, named this one here. So as more study was engaged in this region, more plants were discovered. And those Jim Grimes and Barbara Ertter hooked up through Dr. Packard with other regional botanists who were working on the flora of the entire Intermountain flora. And you can see here Rupert Barnaby, who wrote the legumes, and you can see there Pat and Noel Holmgren. Some of you are familiar with their work. Of course, these are authors of the Intermountain flora. And during the Packard era, lots of collections were made in this area, lots of discoveries, and both Pat and two of her students, Jim and Barbara, were acknowledged as important field botanists making these collections. So the study of floristics is ongoing, and of course we all now are familiar with the Intermountain flora, but the process is continuing. I then took over Pat Packard's position at the College of Idaho, and I've been involved in continuing floristic studies. My first project with the flora of Steens Mountain, and I've been taking students out in the field into the Owyhee region, where I'm focusing my efforts. You'll hear more about this in a minute. And then I'm also interested in some of the offshoots of studying floristics. Is you find these crazy things that just don't read the books. And lomatiums are notorious for not reading the books. And so I have come to spending a lot of time trying to figure out lomatiums, which are biscuit roots. One of the things that you'll always struggle over if you go out in the field and try to figure out what biscuit root you're looking at. And in the process have been sidetracked a little bit from my Owyhee flora to be involved in a study of the evolution of lomatium. And I'll talk a little more about that in just a minute too. And so the field study, getting out, finding what's out there in nature, is the first step, of course, to understanding the diversity, because you've got to have vouchers and you've got to have the data. And the data of this field of botany, floristics, is comes in the herbarium. And so my students and I have published several articles, and students have done several theses and presented our work in the form of posters. And here we present the discovery of a related thing to Lomatium grayi that is up in Adams County, just stay in Owyhee County. But among the offshoots of studying a flora is you become pretty seriously involved in trying to figure out what these are and who they're related to. And sometimes that takes you into collaborations. And I have been collaborating with Jim Smith at Boise State extensively. Some of you may have heard him or me talk about some of our lomatium work. But in the process of our study, we have not only described Lomatium andrewsianum, that one on the right that hides out disguised as Lomatium triternatum for several years. And this thing here, Lomatium simplex, was described quite some time ago. It was also hiding out as Lomatium triternatum. And so what we've been realizing is that there are lots of very different things that are all lumped together under a Lomatium triternatum, or as Barbara Wilson says, Lomatium triternatum, and they're very difficult to name, and hence triternatum is what we sometimes call Lomatium triternatum in all its bits. At any rate, in the process of doing floras, you find new plant species, you resurrect others. So now we're calling this thing, which many of you learned as Lomatium triternatum, is Lomatium simplex. This is the narrow-leaved biscuit root, which used to be just one of the many 9-leaved biscuit roots, the triternatum group. And one of the things that first got me collaborating with Jim is this little plant here. On the left, you see this is Lomatium, a biscuit root, Raven's biscuit root. But at the time that we started looking at this, it was hiding in a folder with Nevada biscuit root, and it doesn't look anything like Nevada biscuit root. Well, in the process of starting to do some genetic work, we realized that not only is it a different species than Lomatium nevadensis, but we have this one on the right that we were collecting and thought it was this, and it turned out that it was a fairly cryptic species hiding out in this, which was a new undescribed species. So all of a sudden, we're finding all these new species that are just sitting in the folders in the herbarium that nobody has ever really figured out. And we read an article recently that said the average between the time of the first collection of the average plant species, it takes 29 years on average before that first collected, first seen taxon gets a name and the species is named. So figure about 30 years before people realize that there's something there that is really distinct and deserves a name. But the root of all this is, of course, making vouchers. And photographs are great, but without vouchers, you can't make sure that you're seeing and identifying what you think you are. And reports, oh, I saw this little grape fern up in the valley, and well, there are a lot of grape ferns and they all look alike. Which one was it? I don't know. Well, we don't know what it is. So vouchers are really the core of our work. And so here's the herbarium, and you open one of these cabinet drawers, and this is what's inside. Most of you are all familiar with this. I'm speaking mainly to the people who don't know this now, and there are many in the audience who are probably new to botany. And what we have to do is when we get the plants from the field, we bring them in, mount them, label them, and make sure those data are preserved. We put them in the cabinets, and we basically store them. And I think, like most people, I thought when I first came into botany, okay, we know everything, and they're just sitting in there, sort of to kind of just, keep somebody happy and somebody busy to go in and look at them occasionally. But those are the basis for the data that we rely on for the naming of plants and reference, and we update. And so a plant may get renamed like some of those biscuit roots I was talking about. And but until you go into the cabinet and rename the specimen, we don't have the data. So to show, we've since the era of Boone, the 40 years, Boone was the botanist in the College of Idaho, then Tucker, and then Packard, and then in the last 30 years, me. We've grown our herbarium to 60,000 vouchers that are now stored in the room in the herbarium in Boone Hall. But you look at this, you say, well, so who knows? Who knows about these things? Well, I do. I go into the herbarium and look at them, but who comes into the herbarium? Not many people. Even botanists from all around the country who are studying these various genera may not get into our herbarium. Well, we realized that this was a problem, and you can see the problem here. When you look at Idaho with the red circles around it, you see there's no dot for all these sedges. Now, this is 6 species of sedge, and the dots show that they're present in the state. Well, the maps in the right of each of these panels is a map from the Flora of North America, which is telling us the current state of the flora of this continent. And the people who wrote the flora, with all due respect to them, they hadn't seen our collections. Well, why would they come to Caldwell, Idaho, or even Boise, Idaho, when they're on their way from Washington to Seattle? Whoops! Oh, what's going on here? To University of Washington, or from Missouri to Berkeley, or to Oregon State. But in fact, we had a lot of collections of these, and so I'm showing just 6 examples of many in which we had collections, but nobody knew they were there. So we got a grant, we being Jim Smith and Barbara and I and a couple other people, got a grant from the National Science Foundation called Southwest Idaho, the Comprehensive Herbarium. And now our 60,000 specimens and SRP, that's the Snake River Plains Herbarium at Boise State University, Jim Smith's herbarium. The 60,000 that we have almost and the 60,000 over at BSU are now all online. And what I want to do now is take you to this and show you the utility of this project that we finished about 5 years ago and is highly used now. What I'm going to do is take you on a little tour. If you just go to pnwherbarium.org, you see it up here. Click on that search. And then you can do all kinds of things with this. For example, we can say, well, all right, did William Judson Boone really collect camas? Well, let's go here and type in camassia. Can you read? Is everybody following this, Barbara?
I assume.
I mean, I guess so. If you're seeing it, I guess everybody else is. So we'll just look for camas, and we'll type here under collector, Boone, and anybody, this is available to anybody. You can come in and look at any of the 3 million records that are in this database from 42 participating herbaria, including the College of Idaho and SRP. And part of our grant was to include the agency herbaria, so Vail District BLM, Owyhee District, Owyhee Field Office and Boise Field Office of Boise District BLM, the Craters of the Moon, and several others are also included within CIC, within our herbarium, the College of Idaho. So if we look at Boone and we search for camas, we see, this is live online right now. I'm doing this as you're watching. You see Camassia quamish, var brevifolia, or breviflora, and you can see the specimens. And you can see here, these are housed at the College of Idaho. You can click on the specimen and you can see, and you can zoom in on the label if you like, and you can find out all kinds of things from this. And I thought we'd do a few of these just to kind of show you the utility. Let's search for, here's a really common plant. Here is a vaccinium. Everybody know what vaccinium is? I'll bet you do. Vaccinium, and let's not look at just Boone's collections because he didn't make any. We discovered, as I errantly forgot to erase his name earlier today when I did this. Let's look at vaccinium, and let's see if any vaccinium have been collected. Well, let's look at Owyhee County. So we'll put in here Owyhee County. And let's see if there are any vaccinium in Owyhee County before. Oh, I shouldn't have searched yet. Oh, good, it's not coming up. You all know broom huckleberry. It's probably up in the Stanley Basin. It's probably the dominant understory in the lodgepole pine forests, right? It's very common. Broom huckleberry. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to search and see if there are any huckleberries in Owyhee County. And lo and behold, there are 2 collections of vaccinium in Owyhee County. One made in 2016 and the other one made just this July. And just to give you an idea, here's a plant that's, I'm losing this, excuse me. Here's a plant that is, so over here on the right, you see the specimens. It's showing all of them. How many are there? Up here you see 2 matching records. So here you see both of the vaccinium collections, 2 species. Vaccinium scoparium, that's broom huckleberry. Vaccinium cespitosum, that's tufted huckleberry. And Beth collected this one. Hi, Beth, you're in there. Here you are, right here in 2016. Well, this summer, Beth and I were walking around in the Owyees, and even though, as you'll learn shortly, the Owyhee flora is, quote, done, it's never done. You're always finding new things. This is the most common thing up north, a very common plant north of the Snake River, up in the central Idaho mountains. But we found it for the first time in the Owyees just this summer. And so here it is. You can see the picture of it. We can zoom in and say, oh yeah, there's broom huckleberry. I recognize that. You guys recognize that? It wasn't flowering, unfortunately. And we don't know, is that because we just got at the wrong time? Probably not. Maybe they're not reproductive. Maybe they're on their way out. Who knows? I guess one of the things we'd have to do is go back and revisit. My daughter asked me the other day, Dad, what's your favorite plant? I said, I don't know what my favorite plant is. I don't have a favorite plant. I like them all. And so I said, well, okay, let's take this little guy. I want to get rid of Owyhee. I want to search for Gentiana prostrata. Now, this is a plant that happens to be on the Idaho rare plant list. We'll search that. I'm sorry, I wanted to go back. I'm just going to go back. I don't want to see all the collections in Alaska. I want to just look at Idaho. So I'll put Idaho in here. And we'll look here and we'll see.
Don, keep an eye on the time.
Pardon me?
Keep an eye on the time. It's already.
Yeah, I am. We're going to just do this and then that'll be it. This is Gentiana prostrata. Why is this one of my favorite? You're out there in those beautiful wet subalpine meadows, walking around, your feet are all wet, you know, as you're walking through this. And you get down on your hands and knees because that's the only way you can see these guys. And here are these inch-tall little Gentiana prostrata. Well, we found a population of this July. Beth and I did up in central Idaho. At any rate, as you can see, you can do all kinds of things with this. And we can actually search by enabling the map. And if you want to say, are there some plants in a particular area, you can zoom in here. I'm just clicking my mouse and zooming in, and I can say, all right, are there any Gentiana prostrata up here in up in the let's look at the bitter roots up here. So we can make a polygon, and we'll just do a little polygon here and take a search. Come on. We'll just try that. I don't know if I have to close it here. We're getting close enough. There we go. And we'll now search, and all we're going to get is the records for that area. So if you want to find out if there are plants collected in a particular area, you say, oh, there aren't any there. Well, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to look for Gentiana prostrata. If you want to climb around on your hands and knees up in those subalpine meadows, that's a good place to look. So I will leave that. I invite you to take advantage of this in your own explorations and the own your work you're doing. But this resource has opened up and changed botany in Southwest Iowa. We now can see what plants need revisions. We found a rare plant a couple years ago and we said, oh, looks like there's 20 specimens of this in Idaho. We got them on a loan. We looked at them, and there was only one specimen in Idaho that stood up the test. They were misidentified. So this provides us a tool for revisiting places that were collected earlier, verifying, and so on and so forth. So, Barbara, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, okay. So let's see. You mentioned this talk was originally, I could point out, for the alumni group at College of Idaho. So we had to mention this, but I figured, you guys might be interested. One of the questions is, we had the NSF funding for the herbarium. And, but then how do you maintain it? And so we're trying to build up, mostly it's Don and me who've been tossing yearly donations into this, but it's actually big enough now for an endowment. We're hoping to, anybody who wants to honor Pat, who's still with us. Okay, so just talking about Don and, Jim and I and some others every now and said, maybe we should do a flora of Southwestern Idaho. But there's a lot of, what do we want to have? It's a challenging area to do for several reasons. One is that it overlaps two floristic regions. There's lots of exploration still to do, new species discovered, name changes, a lot of verification that Don just went over. And we're kind of now moving into the electronic format. So do we even want to do it as a book? So as terms of the floristic regions, this was one thing. So here's Southwest Idaho right here. You can see the corner with Oregon and Nevada. And we've got the Intermountain region, Pacific Northwest, and actually Rocky Mountain and Pacific Northwest kind of intermerge right here. So we've got several floras if we really need to do it. So for here, we've got the new flora of the Pacific Northwest. We've got the multi-volume Intermountain flora, and they don't always agree. And Flora North America treatments might have yet a different idea. So there's, it's not that one's right or wrong necessarily within the same information, depending on whether you're, say, emphasizing similarities or differences, you're allowed to make a different call as to whether to, it's called splitting and lumping, but it's taxonomic philosophy. Okay, so basically for the newly described plants from ongoing stuff, I've got 3 different categories. And just to go through the examples, there's the dramatic new discoveries that you pick them up and you say, wow, this does not fit anywhere. I mean, so I don't think you see stands of Senecio ertterae like this in Leslie Gulch anymore. It's really declined as other things have been taking over, unfortunately. But that was one that clearly was not something else. Ivesy ripara, another one that was clearly just not something else. So those are the easy ones. As Don pointed out, most things get shoehorned into something that they sort of fit, and it takes somebody to take a broad view. This is the kind of stuff that was common when I was a PhD student, doing a revisionary study where you look at the whole group. This is from a thing that I did after coming to Boise, looking at Abronia and mellifera, and says, well, wait a minute, the stuff from the Owyees and the stuff from the foothills are very different. And still working on that, but it means that the one in the foothills, within sight of the Capitol building, was an undescribed variety and rare. But that you could just do with morphology alone. Then there's the ones that now that you do the molecular phylogenetic analysis, here's this lomatium Don was talking about, that this will, you may have not realized it was distinct, but then it comes out in a totally different part of the clade. And usually when you go back and have this happen, you go back and say, oh, actually there are morphological differences. In this case, I think the bulb was one of the, or the corm, one of the main differences. So, and it does make sense, but this is what brought it to your attention. The problem of name changing, I just thought I'd mention, sometimes it's new data that just says you need to change it for that. I mentioned different taxonomic philosophies, whether everything needs to be monophyletic or not is one of the current things that has changed a lot of names. That is strictly based on a different philosophy rather than new data. There's this whole intricate set of nomenclature rules. Just mention here, an older name gets found and that can bump unless the name is conserved, or you find out the type actually, specimen, wasn't what we're calling it. And though now you can even conserve that. So, but there's various reasons why names change. Okay, now I'm gonna let Don take over again.
Okay, so to move towards understanding and actually writing flora of Southwestern Idaho in whatever form it's going to be, Barbara's already indicated that we don't really know quite yet. we've got three undertakings. One is the forays, and Jim Smith started the forays. Then I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to cut my part on the discussion of the Owyhee flora a little bit short. I've presented it elsewhere before so that we have enough time for Barbara to talk about her project, which is pretty exciting, and I want you to have a chance to see all that. But the Idaho Botanical forays are now, we've had 12, I think. Is that right, Janet? Was this 12? At any rate, stop there. Okay, there we go. Every year, every summer, for the last 12, we've gone out and gone to a place in Idaho. We rotate between the College of Idaho, Boise State, University of Idaho, and Idaho State, and leading it and organizing it and getting all the specimens and figuring them all out when they come back and everything. And we go to a place that has not been collected very well, and we hay bale. The botanists say hay bale, and that's when we collect everything. And as a result of that, you know, we discover new relationships, new range extensions. And in fact, I was saying to Barbara today, I don't think we've ever really discovered a new species, have we? And then she reminded me, well, yeah, we haven't described it yet, but look at this. You might recognize the cinquefoil. This is Potentilla gracilis. This is Potentilla that's common. In fact, the variety of Owyheeensis I showed you a picture of earlier. Here's Potentilla glaucophila, which is a subalpine alpine cinquefoil. And here's one we found in these meadows. And we went up in this foray, and Barbara found this, and I found this. We found it independently on 2 different field trips to 2 different meadows. And you know, this is one of those, hey, this is just a bona fide new thing. It doesn't look like anything anybody's ever seen before. These are the closest we can come. So yeah, we are discovering new things occasionally on these forays, but the forays really enable us to really flesh out our understanding of the flora of Idaho. I want to say, when I first came, I've only been here about 30 years, and I started this kind of late in my career. So I've only been doing this for about 30 years of my career, but I did some floristics. I started into floristics in the 80s. And my first project when I came to the College of Idaho was to do this for an area. And I did for Steens Mountain. I wrote a book that has keys and descriptions and so, well, keys, a key to all the vascular plants. And, you know, that was 20 years ago that was published. And we now have several additional, as you might expect, finds that we've made to the flora of Steens Mountain since then. But that's a start. That was very helpful, I think, to a lot of people. And currently I'm working on the same sort of idea for a region of Southwestern Idaho, Southeastern Oregon, Northern Nevada that you see here. Here's the Oregon-Idaho state line right here. Here's the Nevada-Oregon state line. Here's Malheur County and a little bit of Humboldt County. Then here's Elko County, Nevada down here. And basically this is all the watershed of the Owyhees, the watershed of the Bruno, and then the watersheds coming down off the Owyhee Front into the Snake River. So that's the area I've been focusing on. And involving students, and we go out. A lot of the work is just going out to new places and walking around and getting down on your hands and knees and digging and looking. And we've found a lot of common things, and I'm just going to run through these very quickly. A lot of these plants that you all are familiar with: desert larkspur, eyelashweed, bighead clover. These are common things. Whoops, let me go back to that one. That is the one that Barbara and I realized that this was a distinct variety of Potentilla gracilis, and we published this about 13 years ago. It's common. It's one of the most common plants, but again, it was hiding amongst the Potentilla until Barbara found it, and then she and I described it in about 10 or 15 years ago. Another common one, tufted buckwheat, Lemon's onion. These are common things. A lot of times you see there's some regional endemics. They aren't really very rare, but they aren't widespread. So you go to the Owyhee region, you see them, but you go a lot of other places in the world and you don't see any of them, but they're not rare here. Things like the Bruno Mariposa lily. I like to call it yolk flower the purple and gold. So this is kind of our herbarium logo. And this one here, this white form of lupin, polyphilus, Biddle's lupin. But then we also have a lot of rare plants, and I don't want to spend a lot of time, a whole lot of slides here, and I'm going to fly through them so we have time for Barbara. Where are the rare plants? They're mostly on ash outcrops like this, and this is volcanic ash. The volcanism for the last 16 million years in this part of the country, and leaving ash deposits. And a lot of these are barren. They're hard environments for plants to colonize, and so new species we would call neo-endemics. A lot of the plants on these things are endemic to these places and have evolved fairly recently, like this little greeley spring parsley found only up here in the Succor Creek ash. Here's the Oregon-Idaho border right here. There's Jordan Craters. Here's Jordan Valley down here, Rome down here. But there's ash beds at Rome Chalk Basin, Leslie Gulch, and Succor Creek. Some of the things we've already talked about that were endemics that I mentioned earlier are endemic only to Leslie Gulch. And of course, these are things that often are described, named for Packard or described by Packard students. And these are a few of those. Here's Barbara with her Ertter's ragwort, Packard's blazing star. This is grimy Ivesea. The closest Barbara could get when she named this was Ripara, means grimy, and she wanted to name it after Jim Grimes. So this is grimy Ivesea. And there are some rare endemic taxa that are found in more than one type of ash. The ash flows are those four I showed you, and then they come around onto the Owyhee Front over on the northeast side of the Owyees. That would be mostly east, Beth. I would say mostly north, but anyway, we'll call it northeast. These are things that are growing widespread on these ashes for the most part, like the Cryptantha propria, Cusick's pincushion, Liebberg's clover, and this false naked buckwheat, which we found only recently in Idaho, although it's very common in a very narrow area over in Leslie Gulch. There's some rare endemic taxa on the canyon walls, like smooth prickly phlox, Owyhee River stickseed, and Packard's mugwort. These things only grow in the canyon walls. That's where you see them. There are some things that only grow on these little gravelly benches in the upper Owyhee River area, broad fleabane and Barren Valley colomia. Here's the broad fleabane growing on those rhyolitic gravels. We have another suite of rare plants that some of you are probably familiar with, having done some surveys perhaps, that grow on the playas. Here's a picture. It looks like a lake. Well, it is in May, but it dries out by mid-June or mid-July and is basically just a playa, a beach, Spanish word for beach. These playas that are wet in the spring, dry, and there's a suite of plants that are well adapted to that, like Davis pepperweed and this time leaf mesa mint, which is, we've only found this in one population in Idaho. Several of you, I think, I don't know, is Lynn here? Beth, you are. We're looking for this, and we're unable to find repeat the collection when we went back looking for Heather Schwartz's collection. When they looked, I didn't look. Owyhee sage. And then there are some other things that are endemic only to these ashes on the Owyhee Front. Here's the Snake River. Here's the Silver City Range right here. And in this area, there are a few things. On both the Glens Ferry Formation, which is lake deposits, and often those lake deposits are intercalated with ash flow or ash deposits that came into the lakes. And then we have a lot of Great Basin species, which are rare in southern Idaho or southern Oregon, but more common down to in the Great Basin. And there's several of these. I only have a couple of them here. This is Prenanthella exigua. It's about that tall. It's a couple inches tall, and we only know it in a couple places in southern Idaho, and one that hasn't been recollected in southern Oregon. Same with this one, Hooker's buckwheat, pretty rare. but common down in the Great Basin. So what's the status of the Owyhee flora? Well, records are still being verified. That's a hard project. A lot of collections. There's names out there that people have put forth, and I got to track them all down and say, is this real or is this somebody's misidentification? There's a voucher checklist, and it's pretty much done. But remember, like broom huckleberry I showed you earlier, there are a lot of finds to be made, and we'll continue to find a new extension into that we didn't know was in the Owyees, but is there. I've finished descriptions of about 10% of the species in keys to maybe 20%. And I don't know, will it be a book? I don't know, we'll see. I'm gonna turn it back to Barbara and she'll finish up here.
So yeah, so you know, well, Don's been working on his stuff. You know, I spent most of my career, as most of you know, down in the Bay Area. After finishing up as a student at C of I with Packard and going and doing my graduate work with authors of the Intermountain Flora, and then ended up at Berkeley for 25 years. And one of the things I got involved in there was updating Mary Bowerman's classic flowering plants and ferns of Mount Diablo, and I compiled this annotated checklist of the East Bay flora, which is kind of, you know, what started me in my current situation. So let's see if I can, yeah, okay. So currently, since I moved back to Boise back in 2005, plus the information I had when I was growing up here. Been just kind of, okay, repeating, doing a floristic survey of, you know, wherever. And the Boise Front, as I describe it, has really become, you know, kind of a major focus. I've realized, you know, we think it's all known because it's right next to the Capitol, but until Jim Smith here, there, we didn't have really a botanist, a taxonomist working in Boise. And he started out being more in the tropics. So, you know, students would go out in the spring, but how about the rest of the year? So I've been fine. And now there's this lovely network of trails too, because of the ridge to rivers and all the other stuff going on. So one of the first things when I was starting to get enough information is putting together a Wildflower Walks series that some of you have been on. And when COVID hit and we could still get out and walk, and I was thinking, okay, what would be a nice quarantine project? And the Wildflower Walk series that I'd planned for the spring got canceled. And I said, well, let's try putting them online with some other stuff. And fortunately, both Paul Schaefer and another web savvy collaborator, Bob Gobel, you know, stepped up and gave me the web stuff. And we decided to do it as a web product. It's an ongoing work in progress, but already plenty of stuff to use, as you can see. So the area of coverage that I settled on, so is kind of defined by, okay, what can make nice day hikes, easy day hikes from downtown Boise, that also provides the maximum habitat diversity on publicly accessible trails. And so I ended up defining it. It goes up Highway 55, basically to the summit of Horseshoe Bend Hill. So it includes a lot of the Avamore area here, then just kind of arbitrarily cuts across to include a good chunk of the Boise Ridge and the trails that you can get to by going up the Bogus Basin Road rather than having to come around from the backside. Down to Roby Creek. And then I decided to include the Lucky Peak Reservoir area up to Arrow Rock Dam. Swing back to about Point Bonneville there, drop down to the Blacks Creek Road, highway, the interstate, and basically going up the Eagle Road to pick back up here. And then I've also decided to include Blacks Creek Reservoir and Hubbard Reservoir as two other areas that fit the criteria of easily accessible and publicly accessible. And they provided a whole bunch more diversity, which was also part of what I was going for. Okay, just to run through the subunits that you can see here, I've defined it. Okay, so there's the Greenbelt subunit right here. That's what the blue lines distinguish as the subunits. I'm calling it the Greenbelt. It also basically includes the entire residential area outlined here. You know, I like walking in alleyways even to get weeds. The river Greenbelt itself is dominated by non-native gallery forest. I mean, we've got catalpa, non-native rose, Russian olive, non-native robinia, you know, common, but it's still beautiful, and the high aquatic diversity. So then moving up into the foothills proper, which I define as coinciding with the bathtub ring, basically the sedimentary deposits of Lake Idaho, this was long before Lake Bonneville for anybody who thinks they're the same thing. Unlike the Owyhees, where those lake beds are more the ash beds, here most of the deposits were the sands derived from the Idaho batholith. So we've got an awful lot of sandy outcrops. Unfortunately, by now it is mostly invaded shrub steppe. It's where the majority of the hiking trails are. And there's still obviously some lovely, beautiful. Tentatively, I'm dividing it into an eastern section, which is more uniformly the sand, and a western section, which has things like more diversity of substrates, and so more diversity of species. Okay, moving up, there's this band, which is above the Lake Idaho sediments, which is about 4,000 feet, a bit higher. So between the sediments and the conifer zone. And it's also shrub steppe. So this is where you've got a lot of post-fire seeding, the terraces that were carved into the slopes in places. There's not as many access points for short hikes, very popular with the bicyclists and the motorized recreation. And then you get up into the conifer zone, Moores Mountain, Lucky Peak, going all the, in Schaefer Butte, Bogus Basin, going all the way to Aldapi Summit, and then Shaw Mountain proper. Mostly Douglas fir and ponderosa pine are the trees. It's a wonderful elevational island. I mean, it goes up over 7,000 feet, and then it drops down. I mean, there's a gap elevationally before you get to, you know, the next equally high spot. So there's a lot of things here at the very edge of the range. We've been finding lots of good range extensions. And some weird things that, you know, they've been isolated enough that they're doing their own thing now. Lucky Peak Reservoir I decided to include in part because I generated a list when I was a park technician back in the 1970s. And again, there's some nice hiking trails available around here. Cervity Peak here is a very popular one. Again, goes up to Roby Creek. There is as far north as I decided to take it. And it's pretty much very similar to the habitat that you get mid-elevation. This is outside of the Lake Idaho sediments for the most part. Okay, another unit, though, is the Oregon Trail. This you start getting some different because, okay, the Boise River is the dividing line between the flora of the Pacific Northwest and the Intermountain flora. So everything south of here isn't necessarily in the flora of the Pacific Northwest. And Oregon Trail area, I mean, the Oregon Trail goes through at Point Bonneville there, is actually sediments on top of basalt flows. So you're off of the batholith onto a whole different substrate. And the plants show it. It's really more like the Owyhees in some ways. And by adding Blacks Creek Reservoir and Hubbard Reservoir, you know, added 2 more open spaces, more seasonal wetlands and basalt. And right now is a great time to get out. You know, Hubbard Reservoir right now is just full of all sorts of cool stuff. Okay, so for the wildflower walks that I've been giving. So I chose the walks for the maximum diversity of noteworthy plants and habitat types throughout the year. Even though it focuses on the plants, I also discuss, you know, general natural history and anything else I find interesting to talk about. And as one result, if you take the whole, you know, took the whole thing, you'd actually have what was equivalent to Boise Front 101 for really having a good grounding on, you know, what the Boise Front is all about. And converting these guided walks into a self-guided format has been one of my major projects over the summer. That and getting out as much as I can as well. Okay, and all this is, so the wildflower walks is, you know, one major aspect of what I'm working on. But in order to have this work, I'm putting together the comprehensive species list, partially because this is where, you know, I like making lists of plants, sorry. And so basically, rather than just having the top 200 or whatever, I'm trying to go as complete as possible. And I'm looking at probably about 1,000 species by the time I'm done. All vouchered by herbarium specimens, ideally. Going through and updating the nomenclature, making my own decisions where the different references change. I mean, there's already some new treatments coming out from in Flora North America that are going to, I give priority to those over what's in the new flora of the Pacific Northwest. Updating the family, but I'm including alternatives. I try to include the alternative names. Common names, I don't just stick with one official one. I definitely try to go into all the wildflower guides that have used a common name and try to make sure that I account for it so that people want to find out, but what about this one? And then I'll put in interesting comments, the same kind of stuff I'd give in the walk, you know, whether it's, you know, who it was named after, that's kind of interesting, whatever had an interesting story, or I'm not bothering full descriptions. I figured there's going to be links to other sites for that. You don't have to get it all repeated here. And then I've decided I want a photograph of every stinking plant. And that's actually been a fun thing to be working on this summer too, is to go out, you know, however inconspicuous, just as one thing. So coming up with the challenge of how to get good photographs of aquatics. This has been my highly technical, sophisticated setup that has actually produced some pretty cool photos. But just as an example of, you know, getting into it. Okay, one thing I don't include in general is information on plant uses. I know this is what people like, but I'm looking and saying, there are too many people wandering the foothills to give any sense of encouragement to go and pick the natives. They're not allowed to, for one thing, without permission. And I don't want to encourage putting any more pressure on the natives than they're already under. I mean, you could see there's not a lot of camas left. Boone collected it downstream from this, by the way. Not a lot of places you can find camas in the Boise Front. And it wouldn't take very much people going back and, oh, I'll just take a few, I'll just take a few, I'll just take a few before it's gone. On the other hand, for weeds, help yourself as far as I'm concerned. So if you want to use some St. John's wort, you know, you still need permission, but, you know, that's to me a different category than this. So I'm not including information on plant uses for the most part. There might be one or two. Okay, so in all of this, thanks to Paul Schaefer's work, he's been putting in, so we can search on the species list by the scientific name, including synonyms, family, including alternate families, common names, status, life form, eventually distribution by floristic subunits. This is still very much in the starting point, and we plan to include bloom time as well. But that takes an awful lot of information just to get the information for each species, all 1,000 records. And this isn't just pulling it out of a book, because I want these to be the bloom times for Boise. It's one reason I'm taking my own photographs too. I want to document what they look like in the Boise Front. It turns out, for example, that our bighead clover is a lot paler than the bighead clover that's in the Owyhees. And also, if I take my own photos, then I don't have to worry about copyright. Okay, so status is not simply native, non-native. There are species that are within native. You can just request the ones that are sensitive. You can request the ones that I only know of from historical localities. Within non-native, you can also request which ones are invasive. There's the categories that have, okay, things like there's a lilac growing up around a homestead. It's not really spreading, it's more persisting. But it's in the middle of where you want, you know, everything else around there is on the list, so I figured I'll include that too. Waif is for weeds that have shown up in an alleyway. I don't know if they're going to hang out or not. Just kind of, or maybe they were here and they didn't persist, but keep record of them. Then there's the category planted, which can be non-natives. It can also be things that we would tend to consider native, at least for Western or even in Idaho. But the only reason they're in the Boise foothills is because they were included in a post-fire planting or, restoration. For example, I do not believe that Atroplex canescens, you can find it, but it wasn't here when I was growing up. It got seeded in after post-fire. So I consider that planted rather than something that is native. Of course, then you've got all the planted sagebrush that you're trying to keep track of, and it's difficult. So, and there's some things you just don't know if they're native or non-native. It's too iffy. Life form, just to make it easy, is woody, vines, herbaceous, grass like graminoids, grasses, sedges, rushes, pteridophytes, ferns, and fern allies, and full aquatics, things that are emergent. I'm still kind of hassling, do I want to be able to give more than one of these? Because there's, herbaceous things that are also aquatic, pteridophytes that are aquatic, and still working. Okay, so let's look at the site itself. Okay, so again, big kudos to Paul Schaefer and Bob Gobio for doing all the look of it. I would be, hopeless for having had to set this up by myself. Paul's really been doing a lot of good stuff on this. So, you've got the home page, trying to add, updates so that you keep coming back, because I want people to realize there's some introductory stuff here, which I hope to expand a lot more in the long run. Let's see, and this is one way to just kind of find what the Wildflower Walks are, and we do have INPS as a sponsor. If you go up here and click on walks, so it gives a little bit of the background of this. And then these are the walks that I've converted into self-guided format in seasonal order. I skipped over the early spring. The earliest ones are still kind of sparse. I got more into it as I went along. Basically, going on down, these are the ones working on Schaefer Butte Loop right now. I'm hoping to do the Hubbard Reservoir maps. There's some of the interactive maps from the Ridge to Rivers system, just to explain. So let's look at the Hulls Gulch Interpretive Loop. And so this is one of the maps that Martha Brabeck provided that you can scroll in and out of. I'm not going to play with that too much because it gets messy. But so I've got a little blurb, description, kind of, where it is, what you're going to be faced with. Most of these are fairly short hikes by some people's standards because, they were designed for evening walks originally. And with plenty of time for people to look at. So, 2 to 3 miles is common for these. But if you want to stop and look at the plants rather than just, make tracks, that's a pretty good walk, actually. So it goes a bit into the substrate, the history of glacial Idaho, the Idaho batholith. I talk about where the terracing is in the Boise foothills, how it tied to flooding, the 8th Street fire in 1996, and how, what got planted is still, not what was there before. Little bit on that. Okay, so then I start the description of the trail a little bit at the beginning, where it's mostly the planted stuff after the fire. But then, get down and start looking at, I just do some of the selected highlights for, the self-guided tour, and some pictures just to make it pretty. Going through, follow it. So it kind of says, what are the special things, what you should look for when you get to these places, description, going on, my favorite, what's interesting. I even go into the hybrids here between the interior, how to tell the roses apart, wood beauties, the 2 varieties of Eriogonum umbulatum that grow side by side, larkspurs, and where's a nice picnic spot. This one I also added a note on grazing because it had come up when some cattle actually got onto the wrong side of the fence and ate up all the Brown's peony. Okay, and then those that were for the wildflower walks that I gave, I had a plant list created for each one, at least for the things that were in bloom or otherwise conspicuous at the time of the walk. You can download the plant list. Here it is spelled out. Still some updating needed. But you'll find this on most of them, broken into these different categories. And if I clicked on this, I'd get to one of the things, but I'm gonna instead go back and show you, okay. In lieu of, you know, since I don't have everything ready, up and ready, figured we started out putting together just some photo galleries, and I'd like to make more of these. So, okay, it's spring. What are the things I'm most likely to find in the foothills? So this is kind of the wildflower guide, you know, quick and easy for, you know, just picture idea of what is it that I'm seeing now. And I've got the common spring belly flowers. Those are the ones you have to get down on your belly to appreciate. Showy wildflowers of mid to late spring. You know, just selection. So if you just want to, you know, see some stuff, and even one on some noxious invasive weeds. Anyhow, species list is where I've been putting a lot of effort to, because this is kind of what underlies the whole thing to get this right. So coming up with the, you know, Latin name, deciding on which family. I'm still sticking with Asteraceae, but acknowledging that a lot, you know, it gets put into Sapondaceae. Coming up with Latin name, our common names can take a lot of time. Still working on that. And we've indicated which ones have images. I've got about, you know, 3 times as many images now, but we're a long way from doing that upload, because you have to, for one thing, I've already maxed out the space on our website and need to up it again. So you can scroll this way. You could also list by scientific, list by common name. But if we did the advanced search, okay, what happens if I put in Gray's Lomatium? A lot of you know, well, actually, since Don was talking about it, I'm going to put in Lomatium tritornatum. Let's see what I come up with. We come up with Lomatium simplex. So, I mean, that's what happened to Lomatium tritornatum. It takes you to Lomatium simplex. And I may eventually give you more information. Actually, another one I could do, I found out that the back button doesn't work. You kind of have to go back to the query page. Okay, Rubus discolor, that was one I put in. This is the Himalayan blackberry. And I can never remember, it's gone through 4 different names. It's currently Rubus bifrons. So this is one of the places where I've actually added a lot of text explaining why is Himalayan berry now Rubus bifrons. And what are the other names? Armeniacus, discolor, Procerus, take your pick. You can query in all of them and get there. It even gives you a link to this weird story on the story behind the name and Luther Burbank. Anyhow, and each of these also show which of the wildflower walks this species is mentioned in. Oh, there's also one of the links that we've got so far is, it was easy to make the links to the Burke Herbarium, which, oops, okay, now that was the problem on my seat, that wasn't, okay. But there's other outside sites that can provide more information, and Paul's working on providing more. And again, Paul's done such a great job on this. Going back then to a little bit more. Okay, so what are my priorities for working on next? Well, I do want to finish the Schaefer Butte Loop, and then hopefully add Hubbard Reservoir and Marion Williams Park before the snow hits. But these take a long time to write, especially since I'm doing other things at the same time, like giving talks, going out and photographing more plants. I'm filling out the common names and status for all the species pages. Common names can take a while if I want to make sure I get all the major ones that have been used. I want to upload the species photos so that more of the things have photos. Over the winter, I'm hoping to convert the winter-spring wildflower walks into self-guided format by the time they're ready to go. Start adding more information to the species pages and getting out and exploring myself. Okay, long-term plans with collaborators. You know, I see adding more wildflower walks, more photo galleries. I need to finish keying a large backlog of my own collections. You know, what I've been doing, you know, right now, this is very sparse on sedges, grasses, and willows. I've been skipping over those until I could sit down and really figure out what we've got. I also need to, I've been using the consortium and will query, say, give me every Rhamnaceae, or family by family, give me everything sorted by genus that grows in Ada County. So I also have to consider Boise County for the Botis Basin stuff. And I've been adding some things there, but there's others I need to go actually check in the herbarium. And, you know, kind of combine it with my own collections when I tackle the difficult things to really decide which ones we actually do have and don't have locally. What do I want to call the variation locally? The penstemons have some real quandaries in that regard too. I'd like to be able to add the distribution by those categories and bloom times. So that could be searched if I want to say, you know, give me everything that is a composite that's in bloom, Asteraceae, that's grows in the conifer zone, that be in bloom in June. But you could combine that kind of query. I may eventually, I'd hope to eventually add family and genus pages where you'd find, you know, the keys to the species within the genus, for example, and more links to other sites. Going beyond this, you know, I've already been trying to make options for some volunteers, though I'm very bad at taking the time to work with volunteers when I'm trying to just stay on top of what I'm doing and finish the walks before they're past time. But certainly adding more searchable categories. One possibility is the USDA acronyms, so that anybody who wanted to search by those could find it. That also would allow us, if we had those into the matrix, it would allow us to link to the plants website. Actually, I could use some more help with the floristic exploration. I don't hike more than 8 miles usually. I don't have a car that can go driving the Boise Ridge. So there's some long distance hiking into some areas, or people who have access to some private lands that might provide some interesting stuff in the front. More of the front matter, you know, it'd be great to have more information on the history of botanical collecting in the Boise area, people like Isabel Mulford. Nice to get a collaborator to do geology of the Boise Front. You know, I have, you know, this is called Boise Front Nature is the name of the website. It's not limited to plants. My walks are not focused on plants, but I mention other things. And if, you know, some collaborator wanted to start adding bryophytes, fungi, even some of just the common ones as additional photo galleries. Occurred to me that, you know, having separate K-12 modules that classes could use that included the kind of questions that, again, interface with some of the other information. Right now, Paul and I have just been developing this for a computer screen, but coming up with, certainly at some point, it has to be a website that also works on handheld devices. And at some point, yeah, apps and other interactive options. For the main interactive option I can think of is an idea that I actually floated to Pahove some years ago. You know, dealing with the challenge of, you know, how do you come up with a nice interactive component that, you know, will appeal to a broader audience. And I figured, well, can you combine a wildflower guide with geocaching and video games? And that's where I came up with the Boise Front Treasure Hunt Challenge. And what the idea is, you know, now that as we get this along, that putting points for, you know, smaller numbers of points for common things. Anybody who can't find an arrowleaf balsam root in spring is not looking. 0 points for the non-natives. Too easy, sorry. that also gets them in the idea of appreciating the native over the non-native. Like a video game, basically there'd be some posted ones to go out, and if the idea of people could compete to see who could rack up the most points each year. But after you finish level 1, you go on to level 2 for the harder to find ones, level 3, and so here's say level 5 for the spring flowers, go find some Indian potato or Originium. Of course, Aussie's onion isn't all that hard to find. That's why it's only 100 points as compared to Cusick's primrose harder. Small bluebells, 300 points. That's a difficult one to find anymore, or the yellow bells. But anyhow, just the idea of having, this is one idea that, would need a collaborator, place to, keep the points, but just the idea of what you can do with an online flora. Okay, and just wrapping up, acknowledgements, there's way too many to list. Basically, Floristics is collaboration. And, we are depending on what Boone and everybody since then have done, are still doing. All of, many of you have been major contributors. Thank you all. And yeah, so Don and I both.
Thank you very much, all of you who have collaborated.